So we are going to finish chapter 5 today. We had been looking at early locomotor skills. We got up as far as walking. So we're going to pick up with running, and we'll look at running and jumping. I'll let you guys cover the hopping because I want to spend some time looking at the assessment tool that they use in the book, because that's your next assignment that's coming up. So I want to spend a little bit of time going over those assessment tools for running and jumping so that you don't get confused when you're looking at that next assessment. Okay? So you can cover hopping, and then I'll do a quick look at galloping, sliding and skipping. And I've got a little film clip for you to show you that not everybody develops typically. Okay, so any questions on the earlier material in this chapter before I move on? There's a chat bubble there. What's the chat bubble say? Oh, thank you, Kayla. That would be because...
Are you able to hear me, Dr. Wall?
I can,
I
yes.
have my... Okay, cool. Now I hear you.
It was me. I turned the speakers on and forgot to turn the mic on. Thank you.
It's okay.
What would I do without you paying attention? All right. So let me say all that again. We're going to finish chapter 5 today, and we were looking at early locomotor skills. We got as far as walking. So we're going to move on from walking. I'm going to cover running and jumping. I'm going to let you guys cover the hopping, PowerPoint slides and videos, because I want to spend some time on the assessment tool that they use in this book, because that's the next assignment coming up. So I want to make sure that we understand how that assessment tool works and why it's different from the MSU and the TGMD, so that you know what to look for when you're doing your next assignment. Then I'll do a quick look at galloping, sliding and skipping, and then I've got a little bit of film to show you, because not everybody develops typical locomotor patterns. So I've got a really cool bit of film to show you something different. Okay, so anybody got any questions on the earlier material before I move on?
I don't think so.
No? All made sense? Okay, so running then, typically we're going to on average see that about 6 months after the infant started to walk. So really coming into toddler, almost toddler age now. So on average they're going to walk about 12 months. So on average we see running starting around 18 months. Okay. Similar to walking, it's defined biomechanically by a 50% phasing. So remember, that means that each leg does half of the motor pattern to achieve the skill. All right? The difference between walking and running, if you remember, walking has a double support phase followed by a single support phase. Running has a flight phase followed by a single support phase. So for it to be technically running, there has to be a point in time where the body and the feet are completely off the floor. All right? So sometimes it helps to be able to film the individual so that you can watch the film closely to see whether or not they really leave the floor. Okay? So, when we are transitioning from walking to running, we have a point where it almost looks like the child goes backwards, right? Because the walking pattern has become quite confident. And then when they decide to add a little bit of speed, the brain goes, uh-oh, I could fall over, and it goes back to that stability pattern over the mobility pattern, right? Only for the running. Once they go back to walking, then we're back to we're getting a mobility pattern at this age. So we get these older behaviors that we had when they started to walk. The arms lift up quite high. They don't take very big steps initially. There's no kind of trunk rotation to help them take a longer step, right? So when we're thinking about this transition, we want to think about what might be the primary rate limiters for developing a new walker into a runner, all right? So it's not coordination, because the coordination, the 50% phasing, is the same as it was for walking, right? So what do you think the primary rate limiters are to shift into running? What does the child have to develop?
Strengthen their legs, maybe, to propel themselves in the air?
Absolutely, yeah. Strength is a big one. And the other one is a little more abstract. You might not think of it, but if I'm up in the air, even if it's only a little bit, right? And I'm coming down and I have to land on one foot because in running there isn't a double support phase, then I also have to have developed some level of balance, right? To control that landing, okay? So, see if all the work I did before class started pans out. Let's stop sharing that and have a look at here is my make him a bit bigger. Okay, here we go. So I think this is an interesting one. Do you think this child is running?
No, it looks more like a fast walk.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. Because if I'm clever enough, not quite, it would really help to have slow motion on these videos. I don't think there's any point, there we go. There's no point in time where he's got both feet off the floor. All right? So this is a fun point for the parents, because the parents are going to go, oh, little Johnny can run now. And they're going to be encouraging him to run because they're excited that he can run. So even though he actually isn't running, technically, you can see how excited he is, right, to be moving quickly towards mum. And so it's not going to be very long. If they're practicing this because they're all excited about it, it won't be very long, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, before we start to see a little bit of a flight phase. And we might get, if you remember, we had a film clip a few weeks ago, we might get the flight phase of one foot and not off the other foot to begin with, right? So one leg might get stronger a little bit quicker than the other leg. So the flight phase could be uneven. But I don't think he's He's very excited and he's moving very quickly for a walk. So I don't think it's going to be too long there before he's technically running. Okay? Okay, back here. Oh, I'm getting the hang of this now. Finally, it's only taken 6 weeks. Okay, so with more practice, we have the same idea that we have with walking. The more we practice, and the more the brain starts to shift the motor pattern from something that's very stable to something that has more mobility in it. So I'm taking a longer stride, I'm bringing my feet in underneath my hips, I'm starting to get some rotation, and we eventually see arms swinging in opposition, right? The increased stride length gives me some rotation, and then the arms will just start swinging even if I didn't deliberately start moving them in opposition. Okay? So very similar characteristics to the development of walking, but with the flight phase involved. All right? And I haven't brought up all these videos, so please do go to the website for the book and look at the videos for chapter 5, right? So that you get the hang of really looking and analyzing what is happening developmentally, what's changing from one person to the next person, all right? All right, so there's something we have to be a little bit wary about with developmental changes in motor patterns, because what we're looking for is the actual change, like the mechanical change, what's happening, right? It's a qualitative measure. I'm observing a skill as it changes. But at this point in time, that child is also growing quite quickly, right? And so we have to be very careful not to look at an outcome measure when we're looking at development, all right? Because they could get faster because they grew and their legs are longer or their muscles got stronger, right? But that doesn't mean that their movement pattern has become more developed. Does that make sense? And we see this a lot with all kinds of motor skills. We've got to be very careful. We're not looking at that outcome. We're looking at the movement pattern, the qualitative change in the movement pattern. All right? Because even if you're working with older, bigger people, right, big people, then faster doesn't necessarily mean better technique. It may just be that person's been going to the gym and has got a lot stronger, right? But what we're interested in is that movement pattern. What's happening to that movement pattern? How effective is the pattern? How competent is the pattern, right? So what's interesting, I think, if you take that viewpoint, is that we say this about early running, but you could watch many adults run and see poor or inefficient characteristics for running. Right? So if you look at your MSU chart, you may not see some of those characteristics as we talked about at the beginning of the semester, right? If I'm a female in high heels carrying a handbag, It doesn't matter how well I run on the track in my running shoes, right? That's not the pattern you're going to see if I'm trying to hurry to catch the train, right? So that idea of constraints also plays a role here, right? How much experience does that adult have at running? If they don't have experience, the motor pattern won't be competent, right? So the more experience we get, the more strength we've got, the better balance we have, right? And so we see this change in from competent running stays. If I'm competent, that pattern is pretty stable unless I get hurt until we look at older people, all right? So again, with older people, it's not that they can't run, it's that the pattern changes to allow for changes in constraints. Right? So we see a decrease in stride length again in older adults. We see less rotation in the trunk. And we see slower speeds because they're not applying so much force. Part of that is because as we get older, we lose the fast contracting muscle fibers. So I automatically get slower, even if I'm being physically active every day, right? So, oh, I forgot that clip. I didn't put that clip up. Okay. What time is it? Oh, we've got plenty of time. I should show you that clip. So, you know, when we're looking at an elderly population, very small changes in constraints can have quite a big effect on the movement pattern that we see. So, sorry about this, that was a complete boo-boo. Let's find that, because that's a fun clip to watch.
We are Jeff.
Okay, can you see this?
Yes, we can.
A few sleeps away from the Good Life Fitness Victorian Marathon, and if you are running the 8K, the half, or the full marathon, you will see all sorts of people from different walks or runs of life out of the course. And Hans Sandberg proves that this event is for runners of all ages. Yes, Hans Sandberg won't be the fastest participant in this year's half marathon, but he also will not be the slowest, which is pretty impressive because he is 89 years young. He is the oldest runner in the event. The former gymnast took up running late in life. Now, Hans hasn't always been the picture of health, former smoker and drinker. Sandberg's own 12-step program was literally a matter of putting one foot in front of the other.
I gave up smoking a long time ago, and I used to have a few drinks, but all that I gave up. I run 3 times a week. My run is usually 5K, you know, along Dallas Road. It's a lot of fun. Now these are the medals of the 10Ks. Keeps me happy and keeps stress away from you, no tension. You know, you feel free and you enjoy life better.
Go get him. Hans, we'll see you on the course this weekend. We are...
Pretty cool, huh? So one of the things I think it's worth paying attention to there in that little interview clip is how coherent he is, right? 89, and he's totally with it, right? Look how healthy he is, 89. My dad looks pretty good. He's coming up for 85, but he doesn't look quite that good. I don't think. Maybe. So, yeah, that maintaining your physical activity has a huge difference on cognition and brain development and staying alert and enjoying life. So, pretty cool. All right. So let's have a look at this assessment tool that they use in our textbook. All right. So remember that I said that MSU chart and the TGMD are both total body approaches to assessment, because they assess the skill as a whole, although we're looking at different characteristics to look for to put someone into one stage or another. The score or the stage is based on the whole skill, right? In our book, they introduce you to what we call a component approach to assessment. So it's very similar to the MSU chart, but it's like a mini MSU chart for different components of the skill. Right? So it's a developmental sequence for the important components that are identified for that skill. Okay? So with running, if you look, I know it says 7.5 there because this picture's from the old, it's 5.6. So this observation plan is on page 78 for you. If you look at this, for running, the researchers only split running into two components, right? What are the legs doing? What are the arms doing? Very simple, all right? And then what you do is you try to create yes-no questions to get at what are the arms and what are the legs doing, okay? So if you have a look, where did they put that? If you have a look on page 74, they've got the hypothesized sequence for the leg action and the arm action, right? So that's my developmental sequence. Then I want to turn that developmental sequence into yes-no questions so that I can stand there and just watch someone run and go, is that happening? Yes, no. Then they're at this level. Is that happening? Yes. Okay, what's the next question? Is that happening? Okay? So the observation plan that you create from the developmental sequence is this yes-no questions. Okay? So for example, on the leg action, the first question is, watch from the side, is there flight between the steps? And if you say no, then that isn't running, it's pre-running. Right? If you say yes, that's not the end of the picture, right? That doesn't yet tell me what the legs are really doing, right? So we have another question. Does the knee flex to at least 90 degrees on the recovery swing. So when I push off the back foot, what's the angle of that leg as it swings through? Right? That's it. From the researcher's point of view, that's an important thing to know because the angle of the knee indicates how much force the foot pushed off with, right? So if the knee is very open, then there wasn't much force applied. If the knee is tighter, then I'm pushing harder, I'm going to be faster, right? So if I say no to that, it's not at 90 degrees, then they say, okay, that's step one or stage one. Minimal flight, probably flat-footed, right? If I say yes to that, okay, then I need another question because I still don't have the full picture of what this run looks like. Okay? So yes gives me the next question. Watch from the front or the rear. Does the swing leg remain primarily in the forward-backward plane? If I say no, I've got some kind of crossover, wingy out ankle thing going on, then we put leg action at step 2 or stage 2. If I say yes, then they've decided that's the final level for leg action. So that's step 3, direct projection. Right? So it's like a little mini MSU chart just for the legs. Okay? Then we do the same thing, but for the arm action. Okay, so question 1, watch from the side, are the arms active? If I say no, then we grade the arms at stage 1, step 1, high or middle guard, right? They're not doing anything, they're just kind of hanging out here as I'm running, okay? If we say yes, we don't know the picture yet, so let's ask another question. Do the arms move in true opposition to the legs, right? If the answer is no, then they call that bilateral arm swing, and they label that step 2, right? So remember that this arm is controlled by the other side of the brain, right? So both sides of the brain have to uncouple to get opposition. It's much easier for the brain to move both legs and both arms at the same time. Okay? So we might see this before we see this. Okay? If we say yes to that question, then we have our last question. Do the arms drive forward and back? So no is the arms are swinging in opposition, but they're going kind of across the body instead of in the plane of motion that I want to move in, right? Remember, we want to apply as much force. Think back to chapter 3. We want to apply force in the plane of motion. This is a waste of energy if I'm trying to go that way, right? And if I say yes to that, then we're at the final level for the arms. Step 4, opposition with sagittal plane arm swing, forward back plane. Okay. So this set of yes/no questions gives us a much more detailed picture than the MSU chart for running or the TGMD for running, right? This gives me lots of detail about what's going on, and the more detail I have, the more appropriate my cueing and my feedback can be, right? And it means that I can really individualize the assessment and the feedback to each child, because one child might be step 2 with legs, but only step 1 with arms, right? Someone else may be step 1 with legs, but somehow they've got step 2 with their arms, right? What we want is to get them competent at running, which would be step 3 for legs, step 4 for arms. Okay? Questions? So if you look at the syllabus, this piece of work is coming up. All right, so you want to make sure that you spend a lot of time looking at developmental sequences and observation plans for the skills that are in the book. Okay, so that you really understand how to create, you're going to create one of these for a skill. Okay, so we've also got locomotor skills that are more up and down than running, right? We've got jumping, hopping, and leaping. So in America, I have noticed they often call jumping hopping, which is incorrect, right? Because I think that it starts with bunny hops, right? But this isn't hopping, this is jumping, okay? So you have to be careful that you use the correct terminology. Jumping means I am taking off 2 feet and I am landing on 2 feet. Now, if I'm up on a surface, so if I'm up on a box or something in the gym, some researchers will count taking off 1 foot but landing on 2 feet as a jump. Not everybody, depends who you're reading, right? But I have to land on 2 feet for it to be jumping. Hopping is taking off 1 foot and landing on the same foot, right? So this is hopping, okay? And leaping is taking off 1 foot and landing on the other foot, right? So leaping, you might not think about defining it that way, but we see leaping a lot in sports skills, right? Because I can leap forwards, I can leap backwards, right? I can leap sideways, right? Anything where I'm taking off 1 foot and I land on the other foot, take off 1 foot, land on the other foot, is a leap. So let's take a closer look at jumping. All right. If you look at page 79, there is table 5.3 is jumping achievements of young children. So it's got them kind of the sequence that you would expect to see with the age that you would expect it. That's quite old, that table. If you have a look at the note at the bottom, it was originally created in 1936. So that's pretty old. What we see now with the majority of children is that the sequence is still correct, but because we've got better nutrition, I mean, depending where you are in the world, but here in America, although there are many children that are undernourished, but generally kids are eating better than they used to. So those ages might be slightly younger than they were in 1936, but the sequence of change stays the same. All right? So we might see something quite simple, very young, especially if you're willing to take the takes off 1 foot and lands on 2 feet idea. They can, as they get older, takes a little while for the brain to advance to the point where it can change the force production. So again, you've got to keep thinking about chapter 3 because that information is important, right? If I'm pushing down, I'm going to go up, right? So what we see with young children is that the jumping tends to be very up and down, right? It takes a while for them to be able to jump forwards, because to jump forwards I have to push down and back. That's quite subtle, right? That's a change in force production that takes some practice, all right? So we see this vertical jump. We see not balance isn't the right word, but we see takeoff and landing where the feet are not equal, so that force production is not equal in both legs. And we don't really see much going on with arm swings, right? The more proficient I become, the more competent I get at jumping, the more practice I've had at jumping, then we start to see some things going on before the jump happens. So we bend our legs first, we might start using our arms, right? We would expect there to be more equality in strength across the limbs, so both feet can take off at the same time, right? And we get to a point where we can make a conscious decision: am I jumping up, doing a vertical jump test, or am I jumping forwards, doing a horizontal jump test? Right? Okay. We do have these two pulled up. So cute. Right? So nothing going on with the arms or body, no kind of prep going into it, just going. It actually looks like she's pushing off both feet at the same time. She just has one foot in front of the other. And she's landing on 2 feet. Right? And it barely gets off the floor. Right? So there's a lot of strength that needs to be developed there. Okay? Let's look at the next one. Get rid of all these things that are in the way. All right, here we go. So, I don't know, maybe 9, 10, possibly, or a big 8. I have to say, that's not very good for someone who's possibly 9 or 10. right? So she has not been practicing jumping very much, right? Because when you look, those arms are winging round if you look at your MSU chart. So those arms are doing this instead of this, right? She could be younger than I think, and she's just tall. But still, you know, that means that in PE, if she's getting PE, they haven't been working on jumping technique, right? Which is a problem, okay? Because remember, if we're not competent at something, then it's difficult to be successful when you try to transition that motor skill into any kind of game scenario or other lifetime activity scenario, right? Which means then I'm not going to be successful at that game or lifetime activity. And then I won't do it. I'll go pick something else, okay? So it's important in PE, we have to remember, right? There was a big around, I can't think which president it was. Reagan. There was a big push for fitness in children. Okay? The problem with that era and what happened is that PE became a fitness class. Right? Can I get the children cardiovascular fitness improved? Can I get them stronger? Can I get them more flexible? And there wasn't enough work going on in motor skill development, right? So we have to get a better balance. We've got to work on skill development. We have to get them competent. The research clearly shows that children who have more actual competence and more perceived competence are more physically active than children who think they're not very good at moving. And that stays true whether I look at teenagers or adults or middle school kids, right? So it's important that we get a better balance. We can't just not work on motor skills, right? Because the motor skills lead to physical activity that will keep me healthy and fit. Right? Let's get rid of that. Jumping, Sarah, jumping. Okay. So again, be careful because growth can impact a quantitative outcome. So if you are judging or grading or scoring the jump by how high they can jump or by how long they can jump, that does not mean that jump is more efficient and mechanically competent, right? So remember, maybe I don't want to use a quantitative assessment. Perhaps what I want is a qualitative assessment so that I can judge the competency of the skill, not the outcome of the skill, right? And as that piece of video just showed, you know, unless we practice it, unless we keep them physically active and we keep them strong, then we're not going to see competency in jumping from everybody, all right? So, in research literature when they look at, for example, college-age females. So your age, your population, okay, they don't show on, if you look at the whole population, not you guys, because you guys are weird, right? You're PE people, so you do more movement and enjoy moving and all this stuff that other people don't do, okay? So take yourself out of the picture and look at everybody else. They don't have very efficient jumping patterns, right? So it doesn't change, it doesn't suddenly become competent and efficient just because I'm 18, 19 years old. Unless I've been practicing it and doing it, it's still going to show characteristics that are inefficient, right? Think about the rate limiters. I've got to be able to have enough strength to create enough force to drive myself up or forward off the floor. Okay. So you're going to cover hopping. There's lots of film clips to help you. And I'll look at galloping and sliding. Okay, you have observation plans in the book for, let me see, we've got an observation plan for standing long jump. Again, only two components, leg action, arm action. When we go to the next chapter and we start to look at throwing has 5 components because it's mechanically very complicated. All right? But if you're looking at a skill that isn't very complicated, then we don't see so many components that we have to create this little mini MSU for. Okay? So they've got an observation plan for long jump, an observation plan for hopping. Again, only 2 components, legs and arms. I don't think they have, no, they don't have any observation plans for these skills. Right? So galloping, sliding, skipping are the locomotor skills that we see later because now we're combining skills to create a new movement pattern. All right? So we start to combine a step, a hop, a leap, to create galloping, sliding, and skipping. Okay? So galloping and sliding are what we call asymmetric patterns because both legs do something different to create that movement pattern. Galloping, according to the research, comes first before sliding. I have to say in my experience on the playground, it's much easier to get sliding than galloping, but I think that's because sliding is a skill you see sport people use as a warm-up. Galloping is something that unless you go to some sort of dance class, you don't get experience at, all right? So, as I said, galloping, according to the research, emerges first somewhere between 2 and 3 years of age after running. We get running, then we'll see galloping. Galloping is 1 foot in front of the other, right? So I step, I leap. I step, I leap. I step, I leap. All right? So galloping goes like that. Okay? Sliding is the next one. Again, asymmetrical because both legs are doing something different. But I go sideways. So I step, I leap. I step, I leap. I step, I leap. Right? Okay? Sliding. Skipping is the last one to emerge, usually between 4 to about 7. And skipping is symmetrical because both legs do the same thing. Right? So I step and I hop, I step and I hop, I step and I hop. Okay? Girls generally score better at skipping than boys do for a couple of reasons. One, remember that physiologically they are maturing ahead of the boys. So they're a little bit stronger, their coordination is a little bit better. The other problem that we see with skipping is, what do you think? What's a social constraint that we might see play a role? In why we get a difference between girls and boys on skipping?
What was the question again, Dr. Warren?
What might be a social constraint that affects the outcome that we see more girls better at skipping than boys? Right? When I think of skipping as a motor skill, who do I visualize skipping? So if you're a parent and you have a 5-year-old boy, do you teach him to skip?
No.
No. Why? Why don't you teach him to skip?
Because little girls play hopscotch on the playground.
There you go. Exactly. Right? Because it's a girly skill. It's not a girly skill, it's the most complicated fundamental locomotor pattern. Everybody should skip, but we don't teach boys to skip because socially it's viewed as a girly skill, right? There's absolutely no reason whatsoever that boys don't learn to skip, except we don't teach them, right? So we want to keep thinking about this rate limiter idea. All right? So with galloping, there's a huge amount of coordination that has to occur. And the two sides of the brain have to uncouple because both legs are doing something different. One leg is stepping, one leg is leaping, right? So those two sides of the brain have to talk to each other to coordinate the skip, but they have to uncouple so that one leg does one thing and one leg does something different, right? So that coordination idea plays a large role, right? Also, because the legs are doing different things, we also have to, and I would kind of put this under coordination as well, we've got different force production occurring on different legs, right? This leg is pushing off, this leg is landing. So, totally different muscular actions occurring in each leg, okay? Sliding, we've already got, if we accept that galloping comes first, right? Then when we get to sliding, we've already got the different force production idea. But we've still got some extra coordination because instead of going forwards, we're moving sideways, right? And I may or may not be allowed to look sideways. I may have to look forwards and do it blind out of my peripheral vision. Okay, so there's a little bit of additional coordination there to go sideways. Skipping, as I said, skipping is the most complicated fundamental locomotor skill that we have, right? And so getting to skipping involves development in the neuromuscular system, right? So if those two systems are not talking to each other yet, then that could be the limiter for seeing skipping. We've got to be doing two things with one leg. I have to step and I have to hop. So I've got to put those two skills together. You wouldn't say force production because skipping is third to emerge, and we've already developed enough force production to get off the floor with hopping and galloping and sliding and running, right? Same with balance, right? Balance is a rate limiter for hopping, but I have to be able to hop in order to skip. So strength and balance wouldn't be the rate limiters for skipping. Does that make sense, right? You've got to start thinking about the sequence of development and which rate limiters are still in effect when we get to this point, right? So, why do most typically developing humans walk upright on 2 feet? Right? Because when we look at the mechanics and the cognitive development that we get from being upright on 2 feet, it's hugely advantageous to us to use that. Now, why do we use walking more often than galloping? Right? In my view, is because I can walk quite quickly, but it doesn't take the amount of energy, right? So physiologically, it's more efficient to walk than to gallop, because to gallop I have to get off the floor, and that takes a lot of energy and force and strength. Right? Other people may have different ideas about that. Okay. And then the last thing I have for you is this really interesting film clip. So, oh, I don't need to go over there, I can do that from here. So, I've said quite often, typically developing humans would follow these sequences, right? This is what we would expect to see a typically developing human do, okay? What about if we're not typically developing, okay? So, this film clip is somewhat old. I think they found this population of people in the late 90s, I want to say. I don't want that. I want that. Okay.
You're about to see something truly astounding. A discovery that's caused an absolute sensation. One that could have untold significance for every one of us. And not only that, it's a totally engrossing mystery story too. You're about to meet a family that shouldn't exist. A family like no other. They could just be the missing link between man and ape. The holy grail scientists have sought for generations. They're living, breathing men and women, but they walk on all fours, just as we did 4 million years ago. And until this film was shot, they were hidden away, unseen by the outside world. a remote village in Turkey. Here, hidden from the world, lives an extraordinary family. A family whose very existence could rewrite the evolution textbooks.
It was really fascinating. You know, here are humans doing things that they're not meant to be doing.
For the past year, their existence has been known to just a handful of experts who have been sworn to secrecy. When I heard of it myself, I was intrigued, but nothing prepared me for the reality.
Good grammar and spelling are important, but if you want to write essays that inspire,
Now, finally, the secret can be revealed.
The immediate response I had was that I couldn't believe my eyes. I had never expected that even under the most extraordinary scientific fantasy, that modern human beings could return to an animal state.
In scientific terms, it was the equivalent of finding living, breathing fossils. Human beings who had never made the evolutionary leap of standing upright. The quest to find out why took a team of scientists on an amazing journey and raised profound questions about what it is to be human.
The thing which marks us off from the rest of the animal world is the fact that we're the species which walks on two legs and holds our heads high in the air.
It's what defines us as human
In many
beings.
ways.
So, you can watch some more of that if you would like to, another time. But I just think it's just fascinating. What changed? You know, their facial features don't even look fully formed. They look a little bit, not like a Down syndrome, because Down syndrome babies have very flat faces, but they've got like extra skin. A couple of them can stand up and walk a little bit, but it's not their preferred mode of locomotion. So, you know, do they all have some genetic anomaly that the rest of us don't have? Or, I mean, I don't know what the answer is, but it's a really fascinating piece of footage, because you do see some babies self-locomote like that for the first time. Rather than creeping, they'll bear walk like that. But they stand up and walk on 2 feet when they're ready. And this family of individuals just didn't do that. So, yeah, fascinating. It's fascinating. Questions? Any questions? Questions? So start spending some time looking at the developmental sequence and then the creation of the observation plan, yes, no questions, right? Look at those examples in the book, get the idea of this yes, no, to make it very simple to identify which level the component is at. Spend a bit of time doing that. And we will, what day is it? It's Tuesday. So on Thursday, we will start chapter 6. Okay? Question? Okay. I'll see you tomorrow. I won't see you tomorrow. Ryan and I will be